I was standing in my brother's living room, still wearing the black dress I'd worn to our grandmother's funeral, when he finally said the words I'd been sensing all afternoon. "There is no will, Margaret. Nothing was found. Nothing exists." He didn't look at me when he said it. He just folded his arms like a man delivering news he'd practiced. I felt the room tilt. No will. Grandma had talked about that document for years, right down to where she kept it, who witnessed it, and why she drafted it the way she did. She was meticulous, organized, and stubborn in the most comforting way. She planned everything. My brother, Thomas, walked across the room to pour himself another drink. The clink of the bottle against the glass was the only sound in the house. Dad's old desk had always been the supposed hiding place. Thomas cleared it out the moment Grandma passed, insisting he was handling the legal matters. I let him, thinking grief had simply made him overzealous. Looking back, that was my first mistake. "But she showed me the will last year," I said quietly. "She even told me you and I would handle the estate together." He smirked. "Margaret, she was 91. Her memory was fading. You probably misunderstood her." I felt heat crawl up my neck. "No, I didn't." He shrugged, unbothered. "Well, the lawyer says without a will, everything is split 50-50. That's the law." And just like that, he moved on. As if a lifetime of Grandma's intentions could be dumped into a shredder and dismissed with a glass of whiskey. I walked out of his house with a numbness that scared me. By the next morning, that numbness had turned into a single stubborn question. Where did her will go? I didn't know yet that someone planned for it to disappear. And I certainly didn't know that a quiet woman, someone I barely remembered from Grandma's social circle, would show up on my porch 1 week later holding an envelope that would ignite everything. A sealed envelope. Her handwriting on the front. And inside, a copy of the will, with my name highlighted. I hadn't even opened it yet when she whispered the words that nearly dropped me to my knees. "I thought you should see what your brother tried to destroy. My name is Margaret Ellison, and I am 63 years old. At this age, you'd think life would quiet down a bit. Less chaos, more tea and gardening. But I've learned something unsettling these last few years. Chaos doesn't fade with age. People don't become kinder because their hair grays. And betrayal. Well, betrayal has no expiration date. I live alone in a modest blue house on the outskirts of Waverley, the kind of place where neighbors still wave from porches and everyone knows who's related to whom. I've spent most of my adult life teaching literature at the local high school. Retired now, but the rhythm of storytelling still runs through me. I suppose that's why I'm telling you all this, to make sense of the plot twist my life turned into. My grandmother, Lillian, raised Thomas and me after our mother died young. She was everything a child could hope for, sharp-witted, fiercely loving, and immovable when it came to fairness. So when she told me, a year before she passed, that she'd finalized her will, I took her seriously. She said, "Margaret, I've seen how you carry responsibility without asking for praise. I've written things accordingly." She didn't say more, and I didn't pry. But I understood. Grandma valued effort and integrity, not entitlement. Thomas, well, he'd always been charming but slippery. The kind of man who smiles while calculating. When he declared there was no will, part of me wasn't surprised. But another part of me, the part she raised, refused to accept that truth could be rewritten so easily. So when the knock came on my door a week later, I wasn't expecting Justice to be standing there. Certainly not Justice wearing a beige cardigan and orthopedic shoes. Her name was Eloise Harper, one of Grandma's oldest friends. Our eyes met, and she looked at me with an expression that was both apologetic and urgent. "I should have come sooner," she said. She opened her purse, reached inside, and pulled out an envelope, familiar cream stationery, my grandmother's handwriting neat and unmistakable. "For you," she said. Just as she instructed. My hands trembled as I turned it over. On the back, written in my grandmother's steady cursive, were the words, "Give to Margaret upon my passing." Before I could speak, Eloise added softly, I believe Thomas already knows what's in it. And that's why he made sure the original disappeared. My breath caught. I hadn't even opened the envelope, and already the ground shifted. But when I slid my finger under the seal and saw the contents, saw my name, underlined in blue ink, my life tilted into an entirely new direction. Because Grandma hadn't left us 50-50. Not even close. And that was the moment I understood. My brother hadn't just lied. He'd stolen. And he thought I'd never prove it. But he didn't know me as well as he thought. And he definitely didn't know what Grandma had prepared. Thomas and I grew up under the same roof, but we learned very different lessons from the same woman. I learned resilience. He learned convenience. Grandma used to say that responsibility was a muscle, one you strengthen through action. I took it to heart. I cooked, I cleaned, I helped with bills once I was old enough. Not because I had to, but because I couldn't bear to see her carrying everything alone. Thomas, he drifted. Always promising, rarely delivering. He'd vanish for months, then show up needing money or forgiveness, usually both. Still, Grandma loved him. But love doesn't equal trust. Looking back, it was clear she'd been quietly evaluating us for years. When I finally gathered the courage to read the full contents of the will Eloise brought, the words hit me like a tidal wave. She had left her home, savings, and personal effects, all of it, to me. Not because she loved me more, but because she trusted me not to squander her life's work. She did allocate a monetary gift for Thomas, but it was modest. A deliberate boundary. And the most important line, the one that was underlined, highlighted, starred, was simple. Margaret is my executor, and I entrust her with final authority over my estate. It was clear, direct, legally sound, which meant Thomas knew exactly what he'd destroyed. For hours, I sat at my kitchen table replaying the last conversation I'd had with Grandma. She was frail then, but sharp as ever. People reveal themselves when money whispers, she'd said. But you, Margaret, you hear something deeper. At the time, the comment seemed symbolic. Now it felt prophetic. I looked at the copy again. A copy wasn't enough for court. But it was enough to expose the lie. And Eloise, she wasn't done. As she left that afternoon, she said something that lodged itself into my spine. You're not the only one she trusted with evidence. I stared at her. Evidence. She nodded. She anticipated resistance. She prepared for it. Prepared. As if she had known betrayal was coming. I wasn't sure yet what Eloise meant, but I knew I needed to find out. So I called Thomas. I told him we needed to talk. He agreed. Too quickly. And when I arrived at his house the next morning, I discovered just how far he'd already gone to cover his tracks. Because the desk where the will had supposedly been stored was gone. Not moved. Not emptied. Gone. Thomas smiled at me like a man who believed he'd already won. But he didn't know what I had. Not yet. And he certainly didn't know what Eloise would deliver next. When I stepped into Thomas's house the next morning, the first thing I noticed was the empty rectangle on the carpet. A rectangle where our father's oak desk had been stationed for decades, first in Grandma's house, then in his. The desk she always said held her important papers. It was gone. Renovations, Thomas said casually, sipping his coffee. Decided it was time for an update. He said it without looking at me, but he didn't need to. The lie sat between us like a sour scent. That desk was an heirloom, I replied. A piece of junk, he corrected, shrugging. I studied him. The shirt he wore still bore faint creases from a store fold. New. So were the shoes. And the watch. And the sudden confidence rolling off him like cologne. Funny, I said, how you called the lawyer so fast after Grandma passed. Someone had to be responsible, he said, spreading his arms the way he always did when trying to look noble. I knew you'd be emotional. I wanted to take that burden off your shoulders. My stomach tightened. Emotional. A coded word. A dismissal wrapped in false concern. I took the envelope from my purse, the one with Grandma's handwriting, and placed it gently on the table. You recognize this? His eyes flicked to it. And in that split second, something tightened in his jaw. The smallest betrayal gesture, but real. No, he said too quickly. Should I? It contains her will, I said. A copy that she gave to her friend, Eloise. A copy with my name highlighted. The room went still. He blinked once, twice. A slow readjustment of his expression as though recalibrating the next lie. A copy isn't a legal document, Margaret. But the original existed, I said. My voice stayed calm, too calm. And you were the last person to touch that desk. His tone sharpened. Are you accusing me of something? I took a breath. Yes. Theft. He laughed, loud, forced. You think I stole a will? You think I'd risk jail over that? You've risked more for less, I said softly. His face hardened. For a moment, I glimpsed the boy he used to be, the one who hid broken vases behind curtains, who forged signatures on school slips, who pocketed Grandma's medication money and claimed he'd lost it. But I also saw the man he became. Practiced, entitled, and certain that consequences belong to other people. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Even if a will existed, you can't prove I destroyed it. I held his gaze. You're right. Not yet. The flicker in his eyes was unmistakable. I left his house without another word. Back in my car, hands shaking against the steering wheel, I forced myself to breathe. I had evidence, but not enough. A copy wasn't a weapon. Not in court. Not against someone like Thomas. But then I remembered Eloise's final words. You're not the only one she trusted with evidence. Evidence. Plural. Somewhere, Grandma had hidden something else. Something she believed I would one day need. The question was where. I stared ahead through the windshield, the morning sun catching the edges of my reflection. There had to be something. There had to be. And I would find it. Because now, it was clear. Thomas didn't just steal a document. He tried to steal my grandmother's voice. And I wasn't going to let him get away with that. Not when the truth was still out there, waiting to be uncovered. The search began where all my life's difficult searches had begun, back at Grandma's house. The place was still empty and silent, waiting for us to decide its future. The key felt cold in my hand as I unlocked the front door and stepped into the familiar scent of lemon polish and old books. I moved slowly through the rooms, touching surfaces, letting memory guide me. Grandma had a habit of leaving small clues in plain sight. A tucked corner, a misplaced trinket, a drawer that stuck for a reason. I started with the obvious. Her bedroom. Drawers, closet, jewelry box. Nothing. Then her sewing room, where lace, thread, and half-finished projects lay in neat stacks. Nothing there either. But when I entered her study, something shifted. This room had always been her sanctuary. The walls held decades of journals, photo albums, recipe books, and letters. I ran my fingers across the spines, noticing the same order she'd kept them in my entire childhood. Except one. A red leather album was missing. A gap. Small but significant. I scanned the shelf, wondering if Thomas had taken it. Then I crouched down to look beneath the wooden cabinet. And that's when I saw it. The corner of something red. My heart quickened. I pulled out the album and set it gently on her desk. Inside were photographs from the last 10 years. Birthdays. Holidays. Quiet mornings. But between 2 pages, folded neatly, was an envelope. My breath caught. This one was labeled. To Margaret. Only if something happens. The careful wording chilled me. Inside was a letter. Grandma's unmistakable cursive. Margaret, if you are reading this, it means you are fighting for what is rightfully ours. I know Thomas. I know his charm, and I know his shortcuts. But I also know you. And that is why I have prepared copies of all relevant documents. The originals are stored safely in a location only you can access. Follow the clue enclosed. With love, always. Grandma. A clue. I unfolded a small note. It contained only 3 words. Your father's promise. I sank into the chair, mind racing. My father's promise. A memory flickered, distant but sharp. I was maybe 9 years old, sitting on the back porch with him. He tapped the side of the old tool shed and said, "If you ever need to hide something important, this place will outlive all of us." Then he winked. "Just make sure you look under the floorboards." The tool shed. Of course. I rushed outside, crunching across the gravel toward the weather-worn building at the back of the property. Inside, the dusty light slanted through the small window. The floorboards creaked under my weight. I dropped to my knees and pressed against one. It shifted slightly. A loose plank. I pried it up. Inside was a metal tin, sealed, but intact. My pulse pounded as I lifted it out and opened the lid. Documents. Dozens of them. And right on top, the unmistakable blue ink signature of my grandmother. The original will. I sat there in the stale shed air, clutching it to my chest as tears blurred my vision. She had known. She had prepared. She had trusted me. But the discovery was only half the battle. The next step was bringing this to a lawyer. And the step after that, confronting my brother with the undeniable truth. But just as I stood to leave, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from an unknown number. "Stop digging." I stared at it, the hairs on my arms rising. Thomas knew. Somehow, he already knew. And the danger had just escalated. The message replayed in my mind all the way to the attorney's office. Stop digging. I'd spent 63 years avoiding conflict, smoothing edges, keeping peace. But this theft of Grandma's final wishes, cut through me with a clarity I couldn't ignore. It was time to fight back. Attorney Samuel Price was a calm man with a voice like a steady metronome. He listened intently as I laid out everything. The missing will, the copy from Eloise, the original documents hidden beneath the tool shed, and the threatening text. When I finished, he folded his hands and said, "Margaret, you have more than enough evidence to challenge your brother's claim. The law is on your side." The law. Such a simple phrase, and yet such a powerful weapon. Samuel made copies, catalogued each document, and drafted the necessary filings. His efficiency steadied me. But it wasn't just the legal battle that mattered. It was the truth. And truth has its own gravity. He asked me, "Do you want me to inform your brother of the legal challenge?" "No," I said. "Not yet. I'll tell him myself." "Are you sure?" "Yes. He needs to hear it from me. Because this wasn't about vengeance. Not in the traditional sense. This was about clarity. About reflection. About accountability finally catching up to a man who had evaded it all his life. As I left the office, I realized something unexpected. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was anchored by purpose. By my grandmother's faith in me. The next morning, I drove to Thomas's house. He answered the door with a grin stretched thin across his face. "Well," he said, "look who's back." "We need to talk," I said. He stepped aside. I assumed we would. I walked into the living room, the space where the desk had once been. For a moment, I looked at the empty floor, imagining what he'd done, how quickly he'd acted. "How deep did you dig in the yard, Thomas?" I asked. He smirked. "Enough. I found what you were looking for." His smile faltered. I continued. "The original will is in my possession. So are copies. Prepared by Grandma. There's no question about the legal validity." His face strained. "You're lying." I held up the folder Samuel had prepared, certified copies, witness affidavits, and the legal filing. His eyes darted. "No," he whispered. "No, you can't. I already have. I said. The courts will be notified within days. He stepped back as though I'd struck him. You're going to ruin me, he said. No, I replied. You did that yourself. He sank onto the couch, staring at the floor. For the first time, he looked small, like the boy who always expected someone else to clean up his mess. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. Thomas, I said gently, you could have had something. She didn't cut you out. She just didn't trust you to handle everything. She owed me, he muttered. No, I said. She loved you. But love doesn't justify theft. He looked up, eyes wild. You don't understand what I'm facing. And that was when he told me the truth. The whole truth. A truth I hadn't expected, and one that changed everything. Before he could finish, a knock sounded at the door. 3 short taps. Precise. Measured. Unmistakable. Thomas froze. And I realized he hadn't been working alone. The knock at the door sent a cold tremor through the room. Thomas stared toward it, color draining from his face. Don't answer, he whispered. But the knock came again. 3 taps, deliberate, like a signature. I stepped toward the door despite his protest. When I opened it, a man stood on the porch. Early 40s, sharp suit, slick smile. The kind of smile that hides a ledger of debts. You must be Margaret, he said smoothly. And you are. A friend of your brother's. Behind me, Thomas muttered. He's not a friend. The man stepped inside uninvited, glancing around the room as if appraising assets. I understand there's a property dispute, he said. One that concerns my financial interests. I looked at Thomas. He wouldn't meet my gaze. Your financial interests? I asked. Yes. Your brother, he said, nodding toward Thomas, borrowed a considerable sum from my associates. I'm sure you understand how these things go. We expected repayment from his inheritance. The pieces snapped together with a sickening click. Thomas hadn't just stolen the will. He'd gambled on it. Unfortunately, the man continued, now that certain documents have resurfaced, our return is compromised. That puts your brother in a difficult position. And by extension, you. He smiled again. Too smooth. Too calm. I straightened my shoulders. Let me be clear. The will stands. Legally. You have no claim to this estate. His eyes gleamed. I think you underestimate what we're capable of. No, I said. I think you underestimate what I'm capable of. Because while they had intimidation, I had something far more powerful. Documentation. Evidence. Law. And a grandmother who prepared for war long before we knew one was coming. I reached into my bag and handed him a sealed envelope, one Samuel had helped draft. This, I said, is a notice of legal action, including a request for protection due to harassment and attempted interference with an estate. Copies have already been filed with my attorney and the court clerk's office. If anything happens to me, or if you even breathe near this property, the police will have everything they need to pursue charges. His smile faltered. You think a piece of paper scares me? He asked. No, I said. But jail does. Behind him, Thomas finally stood. She's telling the truth. She never bluffs. The man's eyes narrowed. He assessed me one last time, then turned on his heel and walked out without another word. The moment the door closed, Thomas collapsed back onto the couch. You shouldn't have done that, he whispered. I should have done it sooner, I replied. He buried his face in his hands. They were supposed to be paid from the inheritance. I never meant for it to go this far. It always goes this far, I said quietly, when you start by lying. That night, Samuel filed additional protection measures. The men never returned, because they couldn't. Not legally. Not without consequences. And Thomas, slowly, silently, began to unravel. He lost his job. His creditors closed in. His reputation, already fragile, cracked. And for the first time in his life, he had to face the wreckage he had created. Not because I destroyed him, but because he destroyed himself. The court ruled swiftly. The will was authenticated. The estate was transferred to me. And Thomas's challenge, what little he attempted, was dismissed with barely a glance. I inherited the house, the savings, the belongings. But more importantly, I inherited the responsibility Grandma had trusted me with. I renovated her home gently, keeping her favorite rooms exactly as she'd left them. Eloise visited often, bringing fresh flowers, stories, and a gentle peace that settled the raw edges in me. She said Grandma would be proud, not because I won, but because I fought with integrity. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the sycamores, I sat alone on the back porch. The same porch where my father once told me about the shed's secret floorboard. The same porch where Grandma and I shared countless cups of tea. I closed my eyes and breathed in the warm scent of the garden. Justice wasn't loud. It was quiet, steady. It didn't arrive with applause or celebration. It came in the form of restored truth, of rightful order, of peace. Thomas and I didn't speak for several months after the ruling. But one afternoon, he appeared at my door, thin, pale, humbled. "I didn't come for money," he said. "I just came to apologize." I believed him. Not because he suddenly became trustworthy, but because genuine regret has a tone nothing else can imitate. "I hurt you," he said. "And I hurt her memory. I was desperate, and stupid, and selfish." "Yes," I said gently. "You were." We stood there for a long moment, the weight of the past thick between us. "Can we start over?" he asked. "Not over," I replied. "But forward." He nodded. It was enough. I didn't give him money. That wasn't my role. But I did help him find resources, financial counseling, legal aid, a support group. Not as a sister rescuing a brother, but as a woman honoring the values her grandmother taught her. Responsibility, fairness, compassion, without enabling. As months passed, the weight in my chest loosened. The anger softened. The fear dissolved. What remained was clarity. The truth had survived. My grandmother's voice had been restored. And I, at 63, had become the woman she always believed I could be, steadfast, courageous, and unwilling to let injustice rewrite a family's legacy. If you're still listening, then hear me clearly. Betrayal doesn't begin with stolen money or hidden documents. It begins with silence. With the moment you sense something is wrong and convince yourself to let it pass. Grandma didn't raise me to be silent. She raised me to listen, to notice, to act when truth is threatened. What I learned through all this is simple. Revenge doesn't have to be cruel. It doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to look like destruction. Real revenge, the kind that brings peace instead of poison, is simply the restoration of truth. You gather your evidence. You hold your ground. You let their lies collapse under the weight of their own making. And when justice finally arrives, it's not triumphant. It's calm, quiet, steady. Like a grandmother's hand resting on your shoulder. So if someone tries to erase your truth, remember this. A missing will can be found. A silenced voice can be heard again. And a lie, no matter how polished, cannot survive the light. My grandmother knew that. She prepared for it. And in the end, she taught me to prepare too. Now I carry her lesson with me, every day. Let the truth do the heavy lifting. And let justice speak for itself.